If you're a parent, a caregiver, really anyone who's helping to raise a child, you know that feeling, right? That sense of huge responsibility. Well, today, we're diving into one of the biggest questions that comes with that job, a question that can feel, well, impossible.
Where do I start? I mean, just hearing it can make your head spin. It's this mix of hope and frustration and this deep, deep desire to just get it right. It's the kind of question that can honestly just freeze you right in your tracks. And look, if you have ever asked yourself this, you are in very good company. The whole reason we're even talking about this today is because one parent asked the author that exact question. And they weren't joking. It came from a place of real concern. It's a feeling so many of us know. So, to get a real, down to earth answer, the author went to an expert. Not some stuffy academic, but one of the absolute best parents he knew personally, his own sister, Alicia Daniel. So, let's break down the incredible wisdom she shared. So, where does she say to begin? Before you buy a single parenting book, before you try any new techniques, you start right here with a united front. Think of this as the absolute bedrock that everything else gets built on. Alicia's advice is just so direct and powerful. She says, make sure both parties, mom and dad, have an understanding of how they want their children to be raised. That's crucial. Now, this doesn't mean you have to agree on every little thing, but you've got to be aligned on the big picture, on your core values. Because when kids get mixed messages, it creates confusion. But a shared vision, that creates a sense of security. And this united front idea, it goes way beyond just a child's parents. I mean, think about it for a second. Who else has regular access to your child? Grandparents, teachers, coaches, mentors. They are all part of this parenting community. The goal is to get as many of these key people on the same page about your core values as you possibly can. But okay, let's be real. Walking up to your kid's soccer coach and saying, "So, what are your core values?" might feel a little intense, right? That's why the best way to do this is to just weave these conversations into everyday life. Talk about a character in a movie you just watched. Play a game of Would You Rather about a tricky situation. Or just ask for their input when you're making a decision. It makes these really important talks feel totally natural. All right, so let's move on to our next section. Once you've got that foundation in place, you can really start to focus on nurturing your child's mind. And what the science tells us is that it is literally never too early to start. Alicia's advice to read and play music for her kids before they were even born, that's not just a sweet, sentimental thing to do. It's actually backed by some pretty fascinating science. Research shows that fetuses can recognize their mother's voice, that babies remember melodies they heard in the womb for months, and that newborns actually prefer stories that were read to them during pregnancy. Learning is already happening. And then, of course, once they're here, one of the simplest things you can do is also the most powerful. Just be there. Being truly present, not just physically in the room, but emotionally there with them, sends this loud and clear message that they matter. They are valued. Because trust me, they notice that empty chair at the school play just as much as they notice you cheering for them in the front row. Now, being present doesn't mean you have to force your will on them. And that brings us to this hilarious and, I think, very relatable story from the author. It all started with a simple battle of wills. One very determined dad, one very stubborn 3-year-old daughter, and a single Flintstone vitamin.
3 hours later. The standoff ended in a draw. She was fast asleep on his lap, with the vitamins still clenched tightly in her little hand. And the lesson here is just perfect. You cannot force-feed a child anything, not food, not hobbies, and not your beliefs. It almost always backfires. The real goal is to encourage them to explore, but let them find what they genuinely love. Okay, so as they get older and they start finding those interests, how do we guide them? Well, our next section is all about building those long-term skills they're going to need for the rest of their lives. There's this classic saying that Alicia brings up, one that a lot of us have probably heard: an idle mind is the devil's playground. Now, the point isn't to over-schedule your kids until they're totally exhausted. It's about channeling all that natural energy they have toward things that build character and skills and bring them joy, instead of letting boredom get them into trouble. Oh, this is such a simple but brilliant little move. When your kid asks a question, what's our first instinct? To just give them the answer, right? But by making a small shift and saying,
Why don't you look it up first? You're not just being difficult. You're teaching them how to find answers. You're building their independence and showing them that learning is something you do your whole life. And out of all the ways we teach our kids, this one might just be the most important. Children have this incredible built-in radar for authenticity and hypocrisy. You can tell them all day long to be kind, to be generous, but if they see you acting selfishly, guess which lesson is going to stick? Your actions will always, always speak louder than your words.
And what's so cool is that as you teach them to look things up, to think for themselves, and as you model the behavior you want to see, your role naturally starts to change. You begin to shift from being the primary decision maker to becoming their trusted advisor, a guide they can turn to as they learn to make great choices on their own. Okay, I know, this is a lot of information. It can start to feel like we're right back where we started with that overwhelming question. But here's the beautiful thing about all of Alicia's wisdom. It all boils down to a really simple, really memorable framework. And before we even get to that, let's just all take a breath. The key takeaway here is not that you have to be a perfect parent. That's impossible. The goal is just to be an intentional one. You don't have to do all 9 of these tips by tomorrow. Just start somewhere. And here it is, the simplest place to start. If you remember absolutely nothing else from our chat today, remember the 3 Ps. Presence. Just show up for them, physically and emotionally. Patience. Give them and yourself some grace, because growing up is a long process. And persistence. Stay consistent with your love, your values, and your effort. So let's make this real, right now. Looking back at everything we discovered, from building that united front all the way to the 3 Ps, what is the one small thing you can choose to focus on this week? Because intentional parenting isn't some giant leap. It's just a series of small, consistent steps taken one day at a time. If you're